I never believed much in ghost stories or urban legends. I always thought they were exaggerations or inventions meant to scare children. But when I heard about the Happy Sun daycare, something caught my attention. Maybe it was the way the former employees avoided talking about the place, or how the townspeople changed the subject whenever its name came up. It was as if even mentioning it brought some kind of bad luck. The daycare was located on a secondary road, surrounded by tall trees and a wooden fence weathered by time. Its facade still displayed the faded image of a smiling sun, an image that should have seemed welcoming, but in its current state seemed to mock anyone who looked at it. I didn't know where to start my investigation, but I had decided to visit the place in person before interviewing any former staff or students. I arrived at dusk, parking my car in front of the entrance. The silence around me was oppressive, as if the place were isolated from everything. There was a fallen sign on the ground with the words, "Happy Sun," partially covered by dry leaves. My instinct told me I shouldn't be there, but I ignored it. After all, wasn't that what every journalist did? Before getting out of the car, I checked my recorder and notepad. I had a list of questions and potential sources, but no guarantee that I would find any answers. I took a deep breath and got out. The air was thick, carrying a scent. I couldn't identify a mix of damp earth and something faintly metallic. The first thing I noticed was the swing in the yard, still moving gently, even though there was no wind. It was a small detail, but enough to make me hesitate. Nothing to worry about, I murmured to myself, trying to brush off the discomfort. As I walked toward the front door, I couldn't shake the growing feeling that something or someone was watching me. My career as a journalist had never been marked by big stories. I always covered local events, small political scandals, or regional curiosities. So, when I heard the rumors about the Happy Sun daycare, I saw an opportunity to finally write something that would truly grab attention. It was the kind of story that could catapult my career, especially if I could connect the bizarre accounts to something concrete. As I explored the grounds, I noticed how everything seemed to be stuck in time. The lawn was a mix of weeds and dry dirt, and rusty toys were still scattered around, as if someone could come back at any moment to collect them. There was something deeply unsettling about the abandonment. From what I had gathered before coming, the daycare had been shut down abruptly nearly 20 years ago. The documents I found in the municipal archive didn't mention a clear reason, only a series of incidents noted as "unfortunately," without factual verification. But when I discreetly interviewed a few of the town's residents, I heard whispers about children coming home changed, traumatized. Some with scratches, others with marks that no one could explain. I entered through the front door, which gave way with a painful creak. The interior was as desolate as the outside. The walls still had faded and cracked children's murals. There were small handprints in paint, something that should have seemed cute, but here it felt more like a reminder of something that had been left behind. There was a strange smell in the air, like mold, but there was something else. Something that kept my senses on high alert. Every step made the floorboards groan, and the feeling of being watched persisted. I reached into my pocket, touching my recorder. I hadn't used it yet, but something told me it was time to start. "Okay, here we go," I said out loud, trying to break the oppressive silence. In the main room, a row of small wooden chairs was arranged in a circle, as if an activity had been suddenly interrupted. The center of the circle was empty, except for a small object that glinted in the light coming through the broken window. As I approached, I saw it was a plastic toy, a red car with worn-out wheels. I stopped for a moment and looked around. It was as if the place wanted me to notice every detail, as if it were preparing me for something bigger. The unease started when I moved into the hallway that led to the classrooms. The walls were covered with childish scribbles, seemingly made with crayons. At first, They were ordinary drawings, figures of people with smiling faces, houses with chimneys releasing smoke. But the further I went, the more the drawings changed. The smiling faces began to become distorted, with smiles stretching all the way to their eyes. On one of the walls, I noticed a figure that appeared repeatedly, a tall man with overly large eyes and a smile that seemed too sharp to be human. He was drawn in various scenes, always near the children, but never interacting directly with them. When I reached the last room, the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. The air was heavy, as if it carried something invisible. My recorder was now on, capturing the ambient sound, or rather, the lack of it. There was no noise at all. Even the sound of my own footsteps didn't seem as loud as it had before. In the center of the room, there was an old dirty rug surrounded by tiny chairs. Something caught my attention in the corner of the room, a small cabinet with its doors slightly ajar. As I approached, I felt a slight chill on the back of my neck, as if someone were behind me. I glanced quickly, but of course, the hallway was empty. I opened the cabinet carefully, expecting to find only dust and old junk. Instead, there was a pile of papers. They were children's drawings, all depicting the same tall man with big eyes and a distorted smile. In some of the drawings, he stood next to a gray door, which had something written on top of it, but time had erased the words. A sudden sound broke the silence, something that sounded like a muffled laugh, but so distant it could have been my mind playing tricks. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. Nothing. Only the echo of my own question. But the laugh seemed to have come from the hallway I had just passed through. I returned to the hallway with careful steps. The scribbles on the walls looked sharper now, as if they had been redone. And then, at the end of the hallway, something changed. One of the doors, which had been open, was now closed. I approached slowly, each step accompanied by the creak of the wood under my feet. When I touched the doorknob, I felt something strange. It was cold, almost freezing. As I turned the knob, I had the unsettling feeling that something or someone was waiting on the other side. With the door finally open, what I found was not what I expected. It was a room that seemed to have been left untouched for years, but in a state of complete abandonment. Dust covered everything, the shelves were empty, and the yellowed curtains were closed, blocking the light that filtered through the broken window. In the center of the room, a table was covered by a dirty cloth, and on top of it, a single photograph of a group of children. They were smiling, but their eyes. Something was wrong with their eyes. They were dark eyes, almost lifeless, as if they were empty. It was the same photo I had seen in one of the reports, but with one additional detail. A man stood in the background with the same distorted smile I had seen in the drawings. He seemed to be watching the children, but at the same time, he was looking directly at me. My stomach twisted, but a part of me was fascinated. Why was this photo here? And why was I being drawn to this place? At the back of the room, something caught my attention. A large iron door, painted gray. The gray door, as people had described it, but with one difference. It was locked. The discomfort grew. Something inside me told me I shouldn't try to open that door, but curiosity was stronger. Before I could get any closer, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone was approaching. I ran to hide behind one of the fallen shelves, my heart racing. The sound of footsteps stopped in front of the room, and then a shadow passed slowly through the crack in the door. Whatever was out, there seemed to be searching for something, or worse, someone. When the shadow moved away, my breath remained quick and shallow. I went over to the iron door, touching its cold surface. There was something there, a strange symbol, a mark I couldn't decipher. Before I could investigate further, the sound of footsteps returned. But now, they were much closer. "You shouldn't be here," said a voice, soft and hissing, as if someone were speaking directly into my ear. I turned, but there was no one. Panic surged through me. What was happening in this place? Why was I being drawn into this nightmare? The worst part was that with every new step, every new sound, the feeling that something terrible was about to happen intensified. I should have left. I knew that. The feeling that something was wrong was no longer just an impression. Now it was a certainty. Every step I took inside that building seemed to bring me closer to something horrible, as if I were being pulled by something invisible, yet powerful. I went back to the gray door. It seemed to call me, and every time I looked at it, the urge to open it became stronger. It was as if the place itself was captivating my mind, forcing me to give into curiosity, to find the answers to the mysteries surrounding the daycare. But there was something deeply terrifying about that door. Something I knew I wasn't ready to face. Then, without warning, the door opened on its own. The sound of the metal creaking cut through the heavy silence like a scream for help. I didn't hesitate. I entered, and what I found inside made no sense at all. The room was empty, except for a wooden chair in the center, facing a blank wall. But when I looked closer, I saw something that froze me. There were deep marks on the chair, as if someone had been strapped to it. But the worst part was what was on top of it, a piece of clothing. A shirt stained with red, with a mark that looked like it had been made by small hands. It was one of the boys' shirts from the photo. The air around me grew heavy, and a wave of nausea overtook me. The wall in front of the chair was marked not with paint or dirt, but with something more sinister. The marks were deep, as though something had scraped the surface, leaving a trail of desperation. Before I could react, I heard the sound of the iron doors closing behind me. I turned around, and the hallway was empty. No one was there, but a presence, an invisible force, seemed to be watching me. I was no longer alone. I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I froze. There was no movement, no sound. But I felt the pressure, the force gripping my skin, and when I turned, there was no one. Only emptiness. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. And something, somewhere deep inside the daycare, began to move. It was a low, creepy laugh, dragging itself through the corridor. The echo of the voice seemed to follow me, as though I were being pulled toward something bigger, something older. Panic overtook me like a crashing wave. Every breath was difficult, as if the air grew thicker with each passing second. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, incapable of carrying me faster. The walls of the daycare seemed to move, to stretch, as if the place itself were alive, reacting to my fear. I didn't know where I was safer. The hallway turned into an endless maze, and every corner led me to a part of the building I swore I had already seen. I was trapped in a cycle, in a repetition, and I couldn't find the way out. The sound of the laughter was still there, echoing through the walls like a shadow that never faded. What haunted me wasn't just the fact that something was hunting me, but the feeling that I was being watched. Something or someone was watching me the whole time. I could feel eyes on the back of my neck, following me with every step, but when I turned around, no one was there. It was as if the building itself were watching me, manipulating my thoughts, forcing me to relive every moment, every detail, as if it were part of an endless nightmare. I tried to call for help, but my voice seemed muffled, as if the daycare were swallowing my words before they could leave my mouth. The solitude was crushing, and the feeling of being the only living person in that place intensified. The answers I had been searching for began to slip away. There was no more reason, no more logic. Reality started to warp, and I didn't know who or what to believe anymore. The door I had entered through was now closed. I couldn't go back. My eyes fixed on the wall in front of me, where the marks were still visible. But something had changed. The lines were no longer fixed. They seemed to move slowly, as if they were rearranging themselves, forming an image I couldn't understand. A face began to take shape, the outline of something, or someone. My breath quickened, and that's when I realized. The face wasn't just an image formed by scratches on the wall. It was my own face. Each mark represented something I had done, or failed to do, a reflection of something much deeper, something I was beginning to understand. But it was too late. Terror was a constant presence, something palpable, yet somehow, I began to feel a change within myself. The panic, which had once overtaken every cell of my body, started to transform into something different. It was no longer just fear, but a desperate need to understand what was happening. I could no longer run. I could no longer escape. It was time to face whatever was behind the gray door. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts, something that seemed almost impossible given the confusion and chaos that overwhelmed my mind. The fear was still there, but now I stared it down like an unrelenting adversary. Something inside me sparked a flame, a drive I didn't know existed. With every step, I began to notice more details. The shadows that had seemed normal before now moved erratically, and the sound of my own breath echoed with a disconcerting force. The ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet, but I didn't stop. I knew that if I did, it would be the end. I looked back at the wall, where my reflection had formed. Now I understood. Those marks weren't just signs of suffering, but of choices I had made, or of things I had ignored, things I didn't want to confront. But that didn't matter anymore. I needed to go beyond them. Every shadow, every strange sigh around me, could no longer hold me back. I had something greater in mind now, the truth. What was happening here, in this daycare, was far more than just a simple ghost story. It was a battle for my sanity, for my life. I was ready to face whatever it was. I didn't know it awaited me, but I knew one thing. Now, I was no longer alone. The experience, the suffering, it had all prepared me for this moment. It was time to confront the monsters the daycare hid, or die trying. The atmosphere was more oppressive than ever. With every step, the air felt denser, thick with a heavy and unsettling energy. I no longer knew what was real. The shadows didn't just move. They seemed to watch me, waiting for me to make a mistake. But the truth was, I had no choice. This was the moment. It was the climax of everything I had faced so far, and I wasn't prepared. I would never be, but time had run out. I had to act. The sound that had once seemed distant and muffled was now clear and sharp. The door in front of me was no longer just a door. It was the key to the end or the beginning of everything. I knew that crossing it would mean confronting the unknown, facing the horrors hiding in the shadows. And yet, there was something inside me pushing me forward. Maybe it was anger, maybe fear, maybe the sheer need for answers. But one thing I was sure of, I wouldn't turn back. The hallway in front of me seemed to stretch on endlessly, like a timeline dragging me toward the abyss. Each of my breaths echoed, and I could swear something else was breathing with me deeper, farther, yet still so close. My body was frozen with tension, but my mind was in tatters, ready to launch itself into the unknown. What would I find there? I didn't know. There was no way to know. I only knew that somehow I had already made it this far. There was no more room for doubt. Everything I felt, everything I had experienced up until now, led to this moment. The gray door was in front of me, and as I looked at it, I realized it wasn't just the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a revelation. And as much as my body begged me to flee, my mind had already made the decision. There was no turning back. The moment I pushed the door, it felt as though time itself had slowed down. The sensation of a vacuum formed around me, and the darkness in front of me seemed denser, more real than anything I had ever felt. As my eyes adjusted, the scene revealed itself to be horrific, not because of its appearance, but because of the sense of presence. Something or someone was there. I could feel it, see it, almost touch it in the shadows that moved without reason, distorted by fear. The gray door was now behind me, closed, almost as if it had swallowed me. I was in an empty space, but the emptiness wasn't silent. The sound of a whisper, more like the scraping of something sharp, dragged itself across the walls. I looked into the corners expecting to find an answer, a reason to keep going, but the only reason was the growing terror inside me. The floor creaked under my feet, and every step I took seemed more like an invitation to the inevitable. And then it appeared. The creature was. No, I can't call it a creature. It was something much older, much more deformed. Its yellow eyes locked onto mine, paralyzing every cell in my body. The mouth, full of sharp teeth, opened slowly, as if savoring the fear that poured out of me. I tried to scream, but the sound seemed to get stuck in my throat, as if the air around me was being sucked out by an invisible force. It, or he, didn't move. It just watched me with a calmness that made me question whether I would ever be able to escape. The walls began to move, or maybe it was my mind that could no longer distinguish reality from delirium. I didn't know anymore. My body trembled, but I couldn't leave. There was no way out. It was as if everything around me was part of the monster, part of that thing that shouldn't exist, but was there, consuming me. I had no answers, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a nightmare. It was real. And in that moment, I knew there was no escaping. What happened next? I'm not sure. My thoughts rush past each other when I try to remember. I left the happy Sunday care, but the weight of what I saw, of what I felt, didn't leave. Now, everything feels blurry. When I look back, all I see is a foggy mass of memories. But one thing remains clear. Nothing about that place was normal. The creature, the doors, the whispers. There was no rational explanation for what I experienced. The next morning, the daycare was intact, as if nothing had happened. The newspapers said the same, nothing unusual. But the truth is, I've never been able to see the world the same way again. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, my eyes fixed on the dark, waiting for it. For him. Something to reveal itself again. Maybe I'm crazy. Or maybe what I found there has seeped into me somehow. I don't know anymore. Maybe I was just another fool, but anyone who dares to go there, like I did, has to deal with what they find. I deal with it in my own way. Every night, I hope the darkness will bring me peace, but I know it will always come back. Sometimes in the middle of the day, I catch myself staring at some random door, waiting for the gray door to appear before me. It doesn't make sense, but it's a feeling I can't control. There's something about it that still calls to me, something that will never fade from my mind. The truth is, even after everything, I know I haven't finished confronting what was there. Something was left behind.